Tears of the Kingdom has been out for 2 months now, and you've probably already seen it hailed as one of the greatest games of all time, or as the best Zelda game ever, and for good reason. It's a near perfect sequel, and it boasts what I consider to be the most powerful story of any Zelda game since Majora's Mask. I've spent 105 hours on it over the last week, finally completing it a couple of days ago. But there are entire sections of the map I haven't even touched yet, and a wealth of side quests I'm saving for when I 100% it at some point in the future. But there is one major issue I have with the game, and that's the dungeons. Just a quick thing, I want to be clear that I am not a classic Zelda purist who is criticising Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's formula. Please do not take any of my complaints the wrong way. I think the new structure for these games is honestly genius and the perfect step up from the older 3D games. Anyway, up until 2017, dungeons were the main staple of the Zelda games. They were what propelled the plot forward, and outside of Majora's Mask, the dungeons were where the player would spend most of their time. A Zelda dungeon has 4 key traits: an intricate layout with an emphasis on backtracking and puzzle solving, a reliance on finding maps and keys to progress through to lock chambers, unique common enemies that aren't found in the overworld, and a mini-boss approximately halfway through the dungeon. Then, in 2017, Breath of the Wild released, completely changing the traditional Zelda structure. This time, the main focus was on the limitless overworld. Instead of dungeons, players had to explore and activate 4 divine beasts, large mechanical structures with an open-ended approach. Most of the fans hated them. Each divine beast was visually identical, with nothing to set them apart when it came to their interiors. And they all had the same objective, requiring the player to activate a set of terminals to reach the boss. Nintendo clearly wanted to rectify their past mistake with Breath of the Wild, and so Tears of the Kingdom was advertised as being a return to the classic Ocarina of Time style dungeons. That's what got me to jump into buying the game. I was really excited to see how they'd integrate the linear dungeon exploration into Breath of the Wild's playstyle. Instead, what we got were 3 of the weakest dungeons out of all of the 3D Zelda games. Only one of them stands out to me as half decent. The game's director, Hidemaru Fujibayashi, explained that he and the rest of the game's development team didn't exactly set out to fundamentally rework Zelda's core design principles when it came to the dungeons. Instead, we were much more interested in the sheer number of new gadgets Link was able to create and build things with, which is understandable, but that doesn't make up for the lack of content to Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons. Across the game there are a total of 4 main temples. These are part of the regional phenomena questline found across the 4 primary regions of the map. You have the Wind Temple above Rito Village, which I'd rank as my favourite of the 4. This temple is short, but it's thematically brilliant with a fun level of exploration, and it's balanced in terms of indoor and outdoor environments. The puzzles are, well, they're there, but overall it's a great time and still stands out in my mind. If it had been longer, it'd easily rank as one of my favourite dungeons. There's just not a lot to it. Then there's the Water Temple above Zora's Domain. I wouldn't even go as far as calling this one a temple. It's a floating landmass, no different from the other Sky Islands. There's only one indoor section and it's a single room big. This is by far the most disappointing temple. It feels as though the creative team rushed it. While the other 3 temples at least strike the right thematic chords considering the regions they're set in, this one is just a few small floating islands surrounding a bigger flat circle. The puzzles are virtually no different to the ones in the 100 and something shrines around the map, which only lowers this temple in terms of quality. Though the boss was probably my favourite of the temple bosses. I'll give it that. This was my second temple, and here is where I started to notice a recurring theme. Like the Wind Temple, this one had you running around and activating a number of locks. I started to get a little worried that the other temples would follow this structure, and to my disappointment, they did. The Fire Temple in Death Mountain is my least favourite. Yes, even more so than the Water Temple. That one was just lacking in content, but at least it was a breeze to get through, with a standout boss to finish, and visually, it was pretty nice. The Fire Temple is just a mess. Most of it revolves around rail exploration. It's aesthetically strong, but that's about it. Soon enough, all of the rooms begin to look the same. This temple dragged, and it didn't help that you had the game's most annoying sidekick to help you through it. It felt too aimless. I got to the point where I wasn't even interested in working out the intended solution to the rail puzzles. Instead I just paraglided between rooms, which worked just as well. In terms of level design though, that isn't a good thing. Like the other temples, this one requires you to find a number of locks, use your sidekick to activate them, and return to the entrance. By now, this idea had already outstayed its welcome, and it was clear that the Zelda team really didn't know how to break from the structure of the divine beasts. The classic Zelda temples shone because they each had a unique goal for you to achieve, which none of the temples here have. Each one follows the same routine of find a lock, use your sidekick to activate it, and fight a few constructs. There isn't even any enemy variety in these temples, which was always a highlight of the classic dungeons. Then there's the Lightning Temple, found in the Gerudo Desert. I absolutely loved the way that this temple was introduced, with it rising out of the sands. The first 5 minutes of it were fantastic. This one felt like a real temple at last. After fighting the temple boss, yes, this one starts with you battling its main boss, you explore a linear set of chambers. It's dark, so you're forced to head through with only a torch. There are traps to disarm and a couple of basic puzzles to solve. And so far, it was spectacular, at least as far as the Tears of the Kingdom dungeons go. I actually thought the game had done it by delivering on the promise of a return to classic dungeons. Then you get to the central chamber and are told to activate some locks and oh, here we go. I ranked this temple high for the brilliant opening few minutes, but after that, there's just nothing special about it. To me, it felt just a little bland when it came to the interior design, but again, this is just a personal preference. But, while watching my fair share of Zelda content, I came to hear of a fifth secret temple, the so-called Spirit Temple that few people seem to be discussing. I was about 80 hours in by this point and excited. I kept away from any information about this temple because I wanted to be blown away. Before you reach the temple, you have to find 4 limbs to build a body for the spirit-bound 5th sage. After that, you travel through the depths and finally come across the Spirit Temple itself. This one looked so cool as it appeared out of the darkness. I hopped on the elevator down, praying that I didn't have to search for a handful of random locks again, and when the elevator got to the bottom, I realised I didn't, because the Spirit Temple was 1 room big, and I finally understood why nobody was talking about it. I really wish I could be more positive here, but the point is Nintendo really dropped the ball on these dungeons. While yes, I understand that the intent was to highlight Link's abilities in each region, that doesn't mean the dungeons needed to be nothing more than demonstration sites. That's what the shrines are for. I mean, even the shrines felt more like dungeons than the ones we got here. In more than one shrine you had to collect a small key to progress, and that just felt like the creative team adding salt to the wound. I think that Nintendo was scared to alienate new fans by injecting linearity into a game that rejects the very concept of linear gameplay, while also being desperate to bring back the classic fans who hated the Divine Beasts. So they met at an awkward middle ground, which carries over too much from the Divine Beasts and too little from the classic temples they were supposed to be bringing back. When you look back on every temple in this game, you realise immediately that they're all pretty much unlocked from the start. Aside from the Lightning Temple, which begins as a linear trek, the rest of the temples can instantly be fully explored. The result of this are 4 dungeons that feel totally unsatisfying to conquer. This is where the opposition to linear gameplay backfires. Dungeons worked, and were satisfying to complete, because they were linear and well structured. How much fun would the Optus grounds have been if you were able to just wander through, every door unlocked from the start, without any sense of discovery or fulfillment from uncovering another room or floor? Not very. I'm playing through Twilight Princess at the time of me writing this script, and the dungeons so far have taken me between 1 and 4 hours to get through. On the other hand, Tears of the Kingdoms each took between 30 and 90 minutes. Here's how I'd fix Tears of the Kingdoms dungeons. When it comes to the activate the lock system, it works well for the Wind Temple. I'd maybe add a few unique enemies and a little more space to explore. Other than that though, it's great. It's a diamond in the rough and a perfect opening temple in my opinion. For the Water Temple, I'd expand the abandoned waterworks factory that you explore in the lead up to the actual temple. It already displays a lot of promise, with the player needing to traverse pipe systems and raise the water level. It genuinely feels like Twilight Princess's Water Temple, which makes Tears of the Kingdom's actual Water Temple that much more baffling in its design. There's even a mini-boss here, with a stone talus. Seriously, the creative decisions made in this region just baffle me. They had gold here and they squandered it. On the other hand, I'll admit that a floating dungeon is incredibly unique for a water temple. Going off of that, I was thinking of some sort of water armory or fortress which floated in the sky. This could also explain the floating water bombs. Players would start off in a walled off courtyard and would access a number of surrounding buildings with help from the area's zero gravity. The fire temple as it is could work really well if it had a clearer structure, rather than being a mess of minecart tracks zigzagging throughout the place. The idea of using them as a primary way to get around is great and a unique gimmick for a dungeon. If this one was just restructured, it could easily crack a top 10 list of the greatest Zelda dungeons, and having to escape the dungeon boss as it stalked you along the walls, causing the tracks to crumble behind you with its attacks, all while Link and Unibo made a frantic chase to the exit, would have been an epic fight, making use of the track system throughout. Imagine having to hit rerouting switches with your arrows while the track behind you fell into the lava below. Instead of being just an okay boss, this set piece alone would have raised the marbled Goma to a whole other level. Lightning Temple's opening 5 minutes were gold. All they needed to do was scrap the activate the switches structure and stick to the claustrophobic, dark and moody atmosphere from the start. Or, alternatively, I think it would have been interesting if every floor required the player to find a way to raise the elevator one more level. They need to get out and search for another switch through a series of chambers and locked doors. Utilising quicksand as an environmental obstacle and requiring Ultra Hand to build bridges across would have also been a great addition. For the Spirit Temple, a desolate ruined building would work great, considering the depths and the hundreds of pearls found around them. I picture it as being something similar to Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple or the Arbiter's Grounds from the Twilight Princess, with unique ghost enemies and an emphasis on darkness. Having to attach a flashlight to a shield or carry around a torch to make it through would have made for a fantastic final temple to round off. Look, I know these ideas aren't the best, but I'm just brainstorming here. The point is, I understand what the Zelda team were trying to do. I just feel that they didn't hit the mark this time around. The 4 main dungeons revolve around the same locations as the Divine Beast quests from Breath of the Wild. I mean, that's fine. It's been done, sure, but it works, especially in terms of Tears of the Kingdom being a sequel. But a couple of extra dungeons throughout the world would have gone a long way in shaking up the flow of the regular side quests. Like a forest temple in the Korok Forest, for example. I thought they were going to do something like this when you had to jump into the Great Deku Tree's stomach, something like the opening temple in Ocarina of Time, but no. Imagine finding a smaller pirate-themed dungeon under Eventide Island, in the same vein as a dungeon from the Wind Waker, or a gothic dungeon overtaken by Ganondorf's gloom beneath the Temple of Time in the Great Plateau. Maybe even a temple in either Kakariko or Hateno Village to break up the familiarity of Breath of the Wild and to truly give Tears of the Kingdom its own identity. This next complaint isn't exactly a dungeon flaw per se, but something that irritated me more than it should have was the repeated cutscenes at the end of each dungeon. In each one you're met with the spirit of a sage from the Imprisoning War, and each sage recounts exactly the same story. I'm not even exaggerating, these 4 cutscenes are almost word for word identical.
A tale of the Imprisoning War, and the mission our people must accomplish.
It concerns the Imprisoning War and the destiny of our people.
Let me tell you about the Imprisoning War and the duty of our people.
The events that shaped our people's destiny during the Imprisoning War.
It was clear what part the Rito would play.
The course of the Zora's future was clear.
In that moment, the duty of the Goron people was clear.
The path of the Gerudo was clear at that moment.
This revelation sapped away the last potential shred of satisfaction from these dungeons. Completing them doesn't award the player any new information, nor do you uncover another chunk of the story. These cutscenes are a glaring example of bad writing in Tears of the Kingdom's mostly perfect tale. I'm baffled how not a single test player found it frustrating that the same cutscene was repeated 4 times. And for such a highly rated game, I feel as though this element should have been given more coverage. I'm just disappointed. But did I enjoy Tears of the Kingdom? Absolutely. It's easily the most fun I've had with a game in years and a high 9.5 out of 10 for me. So just in case you were thinking I hated this game with all my complaining, know that I don't. The world is so expansive, the new powers so limitless in their capabilities, and Ganondorf, my favourite Zelda villain, finally got the spotlight he deserves. It was a magical experience, and this depiction of Hyrule, with its integration of modern day technology, is among my favourite fantasy settings. But the triumphant return of the classic Zelda dungeons is barely a baby step up from the Divine Beasts. If there's one upside to them, is that they actually bear their own identities. Yes, even the Water Temple. But for a 6-year development cycle and a team as talented as the one behind Tears of the Kingdom, it's hard not to feel let down by the underwhelming selection of these elaborate Divine Beasts that masquerade as something they're not.